Hello, everyone. Welcome to Atomo, continuing the work through Carl Jung's Red Book. Last time we went through the way of what to come, kind of the times and the depth, the order and chaos, the shadow and the light that he started into. The sign of the times, sign of the depths, spirit of the times, however you want to articulate it. Then he moves into a bit of, I guess you can call it the why or his reason of getting into this journey, and that's in the refinding of the soul. And in the Red Book, we have to look at this is a collection of a lot of it is his dream works, because his work does come from or has some basis in understanding more about the unconscious and how that constructs into our entity of the self. And in the refinding of the soul, this is where Jung walks into a crisis. I can say he really walks into it, but he, in his dreams, there's a call out where how would you say, he's lived the good life, he's got all the material desires. And that's one of the things that we look at in life is, well, what do you do when you have everything? And well, what you see some people do, you take a look at some of the billionaires, and why are they buying up land and land and land? It's like, when you got money abound, what else do you do with it? And so you'll find that, some people will, you take Elon, for example, he'll shoot rockets into space, which I think is pretty cool. It's a great way to get to the point where we can be an intergalactic civilization. We have to start somewhere. Others, billionaires, will buy up a bunch of land, because then what else do you do? It's, now you got something to maybe hang a legacy on. And then you have people like you and that really go internally and say, okay, who am I? Kind of going to kind of Babylon 5. I kind of like, Babylon 5 is a science fiction series. And in the series, there's two great races. And I like how this translates into this Jungian work of that sort of individuation, where you have that outer world and you have the inner world. In Babylon 5, the shadows would ask, what do you want? So that's that outer world, those things that we can have. Whereas the Vorlons, the other great race in the series Babylon 5, will ask, who are you? And this sets up perfectly with Jung. We go into where he was talking, he's getting the premonition in his dream, and it says to him, and here's the quote here: my soul, where are you? Do you hear me? I speak. I call you. Are you there? I have returned. I am here again. I have shaken the dust of all the lands from my feet. I have come to you. I am with you. After long years of long wandering, I have come to you again. Should I tell you everything I have seen, experienced, and drunk in? Or do you not want to hear about all the noise of life and the world? But one thing you must know, one thing I have learned, is that one must live this life. So he's having that calling out part where he's basically asking for the soul to come back. And it's a part of that reconstitution of the self, in order to bring wholeness over the emptiness. I think there's also a bit in here about Zoff spake Zarathustra. bad with that pronunciation, so apologies for that. But in Zarathustra, um, there is a point in Zarathustra where he was at this fair. There's a tightrope walker, and he thought, "Well, I have these gifts to give to the world. This is interesting." Sometimes you might have something that you want to give. There's no one really wanting to hear it. Not that you're being preachy, not that you're looking to solve everybody's problems, but you have gifts to give. You have things that you've done. There's way, or you want to look for, how might I help others? And it's a bit of a setup here with Jung and all his work and how he's given that work. But now with the Red Book, he gives us, well, what is the underlying driver elements to that giving of that work? And in Zarathustra, when the character was at this, I'm gonna call it a fair, and saying, "Hey, while they're all milling about waiting for this tightrope walker, he decides to give a lecture. He's trying to give the gifts, and he gets ridiculed. The Zarathustra gets ridiculed. People like laughing, like, "What the heck are you talking about?" And so he's trying to create a vision of you might see people like trying to create this vision of something good, but the people get so enthralled with being in that material world. So you have that outer world. So part of individuation is they're stuck in this outer world, working, doing their work, trying to get good education, building relationships, accumulating wealth, or, in this day and age, you got, a phone here, entertaining ourselves, or the app of convenience, and having those things that we want that take over. And even back in this late 1800s time, the same thing was there. The people entertaining themselves to death, always looking for a good laugh, a good chuckle. And Zara and thus spake Zarathustra. They brought up the concept of the last man. The people who have reached the point of almost like maximum pleasure. Like that's all we want to do is get that maximum pleasure, that outer world stage where you know what, we're not even going to think about really like improving ourselves, trying to do things better. And this is interesting because, and it was a bit of, I'm recording this in 2023. We've gone through the medical thing. I just don't want to say all the names and stuff like that. You know what I'm talking about. Those have gone through end of 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, and be it as you may, whatever you've taken out of that, whether you're a believer or a doubter of all the things that have happened, and there is a sense of the people who, you could, and I'll play it off both sides here, get a sense of people who are right in their conformity of their belief, and you get very large swaths of people that grow in that conformity. And so while we're living in these two worlds of conscious and unconscious, you can have this kind of consciously following into perhaps a mob, and all of a sudden the self dissolves into this overall mob, or this almost the mob gets caught up in the spirit of the times, in their rapture. And so the opposite of courage is not cowardice, it's conformity. When you have this big crowd and they all get together, and so Zarathustra was trying to speak to this crowd to change them. It just didn't happen. There's nobody there to go along with the task. So what you see in what Jung is trying to do here, he's having these premonitions. He's going through this journey by himself. I think that's a lot of this soul searching type stuff is very solitary work. And in Zarathustra, Das Spake, Zarathustra, so struggling with that. And I do this in coaching as well, or trying to do change. And if you look at Cotter's 8 steps of change, there is kind of creating that burning platform. Why do we need to change? But also the other one is, who are the compatriots, your allies in that journey of change? And instead of trying to take everybody, you can't take everybody. Not everybody's either willing or ready to go on that journey. So you look to find, you know, that group of people that want to go with you. Because it's so easy to tear things down, and there's a bit of a metaphor of the gate of destruction being so wide that it's almost like it's a super highway. You can flow so many people through it. But if you want the gate of peace, it's very narrow, and sometimes none may even enter it. And Solzhenitsyn talked about this, having just that one person that can really stand up to the system, the conformity of that system, and show that courage and to say, this is not correct. And then all of a sudden, people start to snap out of it. So it's a bit of the kind of the force behind the evolution of a soul, and in the underlying value systems that come with that. So Jung also says here, the spirit of the depths forced me to say this, and at the same time to undergo it against myself, since I had not expected it then. I still labored misguidedly under the spirit of this time and thought differently about the human soul. I thought and spoke much of the soul. I knew many learned words for her. I had judged her and turned her into a scientific object. Yeah. So again, that kind of that really trying to put meaning in using language that is not quite congruent to the language of the soul. So it's basically it's going to transcend, like, how do we explain soul? It's going to transcend a lot of the language that we have. So if we try to put like a scientific process around how to determine or build or what is a soul, so we don't even have words for it. You have to experience it. And that's what Jung is showing us here in the Red Book. And it's the primary whole thing about the Red Book is he's going through that experiential exercise and giving us the gift of this book to look through that exercise with him. And thank you to the folk who have translated this work. So let's continue on with what Jung is saying. From this, we learn how the spirit of the depths considers the soul. He sees her as a living and self-existing being. And with this, he contradicts the spirit of the time, for whom the soul is a thing dependent on man, which lets herself be judged and arranged, in whose circumference we can grasp. I had to accept that what I previously called my soul was not at all my soul, but a dead system. Interesting. Hence, I had to speak to my soul as something far off and unknown, which did not exist through me, but through whom I existed. He whose desire turns away from outer things reaches the place of the soul. If he does not find the soul, the horror of emptiness will overcome him, and fear will drive him with a whip, lashing time and again in a desperate endeavor, in a blind desire for the hollow things of this world. He becomes a fool through his endless desire and forgets the way of his soul, never to find her again. And he'll run after all things and will seize hold of them, but he will not find his soul, since he would find her only in himself. Truly, his soul lies in things and men, but the blind one seizes things in men, yet not his soul in things and men. He has no knowledge of his soul. How could he tell her apart from things and men? He could find his soul in desire itself, but not in the objects of desire. If he possessed his desire, and his desire did not possess him, he would lay a hand on his soul, since his desire is the image and expression of his soul. So there's two. I'm pulling two components out here, and this comes back to the inner world and the outer world, and living in that conscious and unconscious, being able to kind of tap into. I just look at this as having that value system. It's kind of like you see the zombie apocalypse, and we joke a lot about the zombie apocalypse. And what are zombies? Well, we would say they're soulless. They're like these automaton that walk around, want to eat brains or extract whatever resources they need in order to live and survive. That they do it in a big mob. They're typically in a mob, and that's where a bit of the derogatory zombie comes from. You walk through, go to a mall. Go to a mall during the busiest time of that mall, especially in a big city. For those of you that live in a big city, just watch the people just meander through and try. I walk a little bit fast. So this is where it gets very difficult, is the speed at which I walk. I need to really focus on navigating and pathfinding through a mall. And it's actually quite tiring because these almost soulless people are just, the way they move has no, sometimes it seemingly has no order to it. There's odd bits of randomness, and it's hard to anticipate where you're kind of in a flow with a bunch of zombies, and I need to kind of, get past some of them because they're just plodding along. And you think I'm on a line, and then you get people who are, walking against the flow. Typically here in Canada, you should, walk to the right so that you kind of set up traffic lanes. And then just people who are just kind of wandering, coming against the flow, or trying to cut in different ways, or they're on their phones and are just kind of, the people who are, you think they're going to stop, but they're not really going to stop, or they're going to turn, they're not going to turn. So you go in a particular direction, and all of a sudden they just suddenly turn. You almost end up smashing into them. Yeah. Without the soul, the body is dead. Without the body, the soul is unreal, and the soul is the home of our supreme values. So that's where I'd like to leave it, because when we get into the supreme values, we then have to take a look at, well, there's going to be elements of this conversation that are going to talk about God. We're not going to talk too much about God in the metaphysical sense or sky fairy sense. But it is something that comes in here, and we have to look at, how do we talk about the soul without talking about perhaps a higher authority. So that's going to be coming up in the upcoming talks on this. Thank you for listening so far, and see you in the next video.